Well, to talk about all of this, we welcome here in our studio Simon Marks. He is the president and chief correspondent of Feature Story News. From Berlin, Gordon Guthrie is a former candidate for the Scottish National Party and author of the book Scotland After Brexit. With us in the studio, Jeff Stacey is a former US State Department official during the Obama administration, and Merrill Matthews is a resident scholar at the Institute for Policy Innovation. He joins us from Dallas. Welcome to all of you. Simon, let me start with you. Tuesday, today, second day of Trump's visit. The first day, of course, as Jamie Owen just told us, lots of pomp, lots of ceremony, lots of marching bands, etc. But today they got down to some serious work, meetings with Theresa May, with the cabinet. What does this visit achieve so far?
Well, it could have gone a lot worse. I mean, I think that's the best thing we can say about it. But this is a very odd state visit. I mean, first of all, cosmetically, it's an odd state visit. No stagecoach ride through the centre of London, no overnight stay at Buckingham Palace, no address to a joint session of the Houses of Parliament, many of the trappings afforded to previous heads of government when they've made state visits to the United Kingdom, and promises by President Trump that may never come to fruition. He talked there about this fantastic, fantabulous trade deal that the United States is ready to do with the United Kingdom. It could, he said, even double or triple the amount of trade between the two countries. There is no evidence to support that that is possible, and there is no evidence yet to support the view that even were a trade deal to be negotiated, it could be ratified by the US Congress. Remember, he's not been able yet to ratify the US-Mexico-Canada agreement that is supposed to succeed NAFTA. Also, I think just some oddities in terms of the president during that press conference not seeming to recognize the acronym NHS for Britain's National Health Service, and then saying that the NHS and everything else would be up for grabs during the course of free trade negotiations. That's a huge gift to those people who want Britain to stay in the European Union. The idea that American pharmaceutical companies are coming after our NHS, that's manna from heaven for the Remainers.
Just one point you mentioned there, Simon. There was no overnight stay at Buckingham Palace. There was no stagecoach ride. There was no joint, at least there was no address to a joint session in Parliament. What should we read into it?
Well, I think you can read a reluctant, I mean, in each of those cases there were reasons, right? Security reasons for no stagecoach ride. They're renovating Buckingham Palace without it, even though hundreds of rooms are available, they couldn't find one to accommodate President Trump. I mean, look, there's tremendous reluctance in the UK over this visit. Theresa May, remember, issued this invitation when she became the first foreign head of government to visit Donald Trump in the Oval Office after his election. It seemed like a good idea at the time, and then as the Trump presidency got into its stride, it rapidly seemed to be less of a good idea. I think it's pretty clear from many of the images that we've seen that the royal family particularly was less than enthused about welcoming him to the UK.
Jeff Stacey, as we heard in our report, both these countries often like to talk about the special relationship. But I want to read you something that was published in The Atlantic this week. It said, over the past 2.5 years, the president has interfered in the UK's domestic politics. He has repeatedly undermined its national security with his comments and actions after terrorist attacks in Britain. He's also bullied and humiliated the Prime Minister, Theresa May.
Indeed.
How special is this relationship?
It's less special than it's been in a very long time. I mean, I've written an article recently called The Hollowing Out of the Special Relationship, and I worked for the UK Prime Minister, is it 30 or 50 years ago? I can't keep track. 1973, when the UK went into what is the EU now, Edward Heath. He is obviously probably turning over in his grave at this point, but I agree with Simon that in fact there may be a big gift in all of this, that this will help the Remain cause because core US national security interests basically need the UK to stay in the EU, not just NATO, but the EU as well. There is probably one other good thing, though, that has come out of this. It's difficult to give Trump the credit, but the UK is apparently about to give in to the US demand on Huawei and the threat to our intelligence security through that network. And so we've heard both the top two UK prime ministerial candidates talk now about basically giving in on that one. And of course, more than anything else, what the UK needs, if they go through with Brexit, in particular, to maintain the Five Eyes intelligence relationship, defense relationship, and diplomatic relationship. Of course, we need more than that, but if nothing else, we'll keep those as special as we can keep them.
Gordon Guthrie, do you believe this will give a huge thrust to those who want to remain in the European Union?
Yes, I mean, it's hard for Americans maybe to understand how important the national health services in the UK are, all three of them. The Brexit campaign, which on the surface seems to be allied to Trump, went with £350 million a week to the NHS instead of the EU as their top-line slogan on their bus. The health services absolutely a third rail in British politics, and any attempt to Americanise it would cause utter chaos. I think that message cuts through to people on the street very, very easily, and it also plays internally into internal UK politics, because there are three different national health services, and the English National Health Service has a market-based approach, sort of slightly American flavoured, and the Scottish one doesn't. And the Scottish elections have been fought on the issue of not making the NHS like the English one. The idea that if a trade deal goes forward and marketisation of the Scottish Health Service is forced on Scotland by an English majority in Westminster would be political dynamite. And we've seen the Conservative Party candidates, I mean, there is a clutch of people running to be the next Prime Minister, and they were poring over themselves this afternoon to say the NHS is safe in our hands, it will not be up for negotiation. And the problem is that the NHS, through NICE and the market pricing thing, effectively sets the price of drugs for about a quarter of the world. And those drug prices are significantly less than they are in the US. So there is a big push in the US for the pharmaceutical industry to get discussion of marketisation and removal of drug pricing from the UK and moving to floating prices. And that looks like a crowbar point in these negotiations. So Britain is weak and desperate for a trade deal,
right,
and the Americans are not shy about putting the screws on.
Merrill Matthews,
So I think that's very important.
Right. Merrill, President Trump also got into a very public and very undiplomatic spat with the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. This is what President Trump said about the mayor. Let's watch this.
Well, I think he's been a not very good mayor, from what I understand. He's done a poor job. Crime is up, a lot of problems. And I don't think he should be criticizing a representative of the United States that can do so much good for the United Kingdom. We talked about it before. He should be positive, not negative. He's a negative force, not a positive force.
So, Merrill, what do you make of the visit so far? Has Trump damaged this relationship, or will it survive him?
Oh, I don't think that's actually damaged the relationship. The mayor wrote an op-ed that was somewhat critical of President Trump, and he responded. He likes to say that if somebody hits him, he's going to hit back, and that's apparently what he did. But I suspect that was, I don't know that that's going to have a major impact on what's happening here. He got through his state dinner on Monday night. He read the comments. That kept him on message. He and Theresa May did a group hug today. So anytime the President Trump can go on a foreign visit and leave without creating a major international incident, we consider it a great visit here in the U.S.
Simon, I want to get back to a point that Jeff raised a moment ago, and that's the situation over Huawei, the Chinese tech company. Trump wants the United Kingdom to stop doing business with Huawei. This is what he said. Let's watch this.
We're going to have absolutely an agreement on Huawei and everything else. We have an incredible intelligence relationship, and we will be able to work out any differences. I think we're not going to have it. We did discuss it. I see absolutely no limitations.
What do you make of this? Is Trump bullying Theresa May here?
Well, of course, but I mean, when he says no limitations, what he's talking about there is no limitations in terms of intelligence sharing, and there had been reports, not beyond reports, the United States had threatened to implement limits on intelligence sharing between the United States and the UK, were Britain to go ahead with any kind of a deal with Huawei to help develop the 5G network in the UK. Of course, the United States is putting pressure on other allies in Europe, including the Germans, over this particular issue. I think we have to wait and see whether he actually made, from his perspective, headway with Theresa May, whether the UK is about to do a U-turn on all of that. What happens with the Conservative Party leadership election, which will determine who succeeds Theresa May in number 10 Downing Street, is still very opaque and uncertain. And that's why this was such a slightly odd state visit. I mean, he's there engaging with a here today, gone tomorrow Prime Minister of the UK, and then flouting convention, directly interfering in Conservative Party internal politics, talking to Boris Johnson for 20 minutes on the phone, having a private meeting with Nigel Farage of the Brexit Party. That's terribly unusual. Let's see where they went to in that Huawei conversation.
Yeah, Gordon, I want to get your view on that. I mean, this was, I think yeah, go ahead.
I think what Trump is saying, oh, we're in complete agreement. Maybe our American colleagues didn't capture the full flavour of Theresa May's opening comments. She did state she was in full agreement. She used a very British way of speaking. She said she completely agreed with President Trump. We 100% agree that the Iran nuclear problem is major. And then she said, we continue to support the EU deal, which actually means I completely oppose Trump's policy. She did the same thing on climate change and the Paris Accord. So, you know, what people in the UK watching that knew very obviously what she was doing, and Trump just seemed to slide over. I mean, you get the feeling that he's here like the last series of Friends when they had a wedding in London. He brought the family over, the pictures are great, but he didn't really seem that engaged with the policy.
He's the ultimate ugly American.
Right. Jeff, Gordon just mentioned the Iran nuclear deal. This is, I mean, one of the issues in which Britain and the United States are on different sides. Britain is trying to save that deal. The United States unilaterally violated that agreement. This is what Theresa May said about it. Let's watch this.
Today, we've discussed again the importance of our two nations working together to address Iran's destabilizing activity in the region and to ensure Tehran cannot acquire a nuclear weapon. Although we differ on the means of achieving that, as I've said before, the UK continues to stand by the nuclear deal. It is clear that we both want to reach the same goal. It is important that Iran meets its obligations, and we do everything to avoid escalation, which is in no one's interest.
Is there any way that Prime Minister Theresa May, and she's a Prime Minister that, as Simon pointed out, it's lame duck right now. She's going to be leaving in a few weeks. Is there any way she can change Trump's view on that?
She can help. Yeah. I think she was. Because we've basically seen Trump on both sides of this issue about escalation with Iran already, undercutting his two principal foreign policy subordinates, both Mr. Bolton and Mr. Pompeo on this. And yet we're in a more scary second phase now of this US-created crisis with Iran, where it's rife for misperception. And if Iran believes that the president himself is talking back, going to war, they're likely to strike out and then get an unrelenting response from the US. So we really do need people like Theresa May just echoing the responsible way to proceed on this, which is to unrattle the sabers. And we've heard one nice concession. Several of us have been calling for this recently, which is to take away all preconditions for talks, and Pompeo has done that, and Trump has not undercut that. So Theresa May is very helpful in this regard. And this is where the relationship is still special. You've got the UK coaxing along, and as Gordon pointed out, really seeming to agree so that Trump doesn't quite see it, but then getting the right message across. This is a good ally and a country that future US presidents will continue to be able to rely on. We're going to have to make it special all over again. But in the meantime, we need people like this, and in France and Germany, to basically be bringing the US back from the brink and essentially engaging in talks. And the Iranians, they have their, the hair on the back of their neck up over this, as they should. They did not start this. So there's a way to get out of this diplomatically, and it appears finally that the Trump administration is starting to get that.
Merrill Matthews, we talked earlier on about the trade deal, possibility of a trade deal between the United States and the United Kingdom. President Trump talking about a deal that will be, quote, phenomenal post-Brexit. Any deal is going to take years to negotiate in any case. But do you see some movement on that?
Well, the Trump administration has had trouble formulating any of the trade agreements that it's done out there. I mean, we haven't gotten a deal with the European Union yet. He's imposed the steel tariffs and aluminum tariffs on them. As was mentioned, the U.S., Canada, Mexico agreement has not been passed through Congress yet. The president starts in, he makes major statements. He oftentimes has trouble finishing these things and actually closing the deal, but I'm sure he wants to do that with England and feels like he probably can with Great Britain.
But he's got a problem with Britain, and I mean, the American side was talking about that in London today as well. President Trump saying his negotiators were ready to go. They are just raring to put the United Kingdom over the barrel, but the British negotiators still seem to be somewhat confused about the direction they want to take. In very practical terms, Britain, because of its membership of the European Union, has not had to worry about negotiating these one-on-one bilateral major trade agreements. The skill is not necessarily still there within the Department of Trade and Industry and other government departments in the UK. And there's a huge opening for the Americans there to move forward with investments in organizations like the National Health Service, while Britain is running around trying to figure out how on earth you actually negotiate this deal.
All right, so
well, it's not entirely clear what the president meant with the National Health Service because of we don't exactly know what he means there, but it's been pointed out that it probably has to do with pharmaceuticals and the pharmaceutical companies wanting to ensure they're getting higher prices from the National Health Service in an effort to try to lower the prices in the U.S. That's been one of the goals for a little while.
All right, Simon, I want to move on to something else now that we want to talk about, and that is, as you pointed out, Theresa May is only going to be there for a little while longer. She's going to be leaving the job. During her job, and it was not a long time she's been Prime Minister, she had one job, negotiating Brexit, getting the country out of the European Union. She failed.
It was always going to be supremely difficult for Theresa May, a woman who campaigned in the referendum in favour of staying in the European Union, to be the political leader who was then going to negotiate Britain's departure from the European Union. To be fair to her, she inherited an utterly poisoned chalice from her predecessor, David Cameron, but also it is fair to say that she did not prove over the last 3 years to be a particularly deft political operator or a particularly skilled reader of the room, which is why we've seen these votes again and again and again in Parliament, and Theresa May ultimately having to concede that she'd reached the end of a blind tunnel.
Gordon, as Simon says, she didn't prove to be a deft political operator. In fact, well, let's listen to what she had to say about her failure to deliver Brexit. Let's watch this.
And it's a matter of great regret to me that I haven't been able to deliver Brexit. But of course, that matter is now for my successor, and they will have to find a way of addressing the very strongly held views on both sides of this issue. And to do that, and to get a majority in Parliament, as I said on Friday, I think will require compromise.
Gordon, the Guardian newspaper in Britain said this about May. It said she was, in essence, she was out of her depth. She, quote, entered negotiations in Brussels ill-prepared and was schooled in the brutal realities of economics and diplomacy.
I'm reluctant to talk about this in terms of personality. I think there's been tendency not to look at it in terms of structural issues, and there are a couple of structural issues. One is that the British overestimate their power and tend to see themselves as peers of the rest of the EU rather than peers of countries in the EU. And this led to a number of mistakes. But the other one relates to the constitutional structure of the country. The hook that Brexit is hung on, in 1973 and then again in 1995, the people of Northern Ireland voted on their future in the border poll and then the Good Friday Agreement. We then have a Brexit agreement where Northern Ireland votes one way and the UK votes the other way because England dominates the vote, with 55 million in England versus 1.5 million in Northern Ireland. And the backstop issue that calls on that is then hanging on this problem of two sets of sovereignty. And the same issue will pertain in Scotland when it comes to it, because Scotland has voted 3 times on its own outside England. And so dealing with those cards, she's then left with an almost impossible situation. What does she do? How does she square this impossible circle? And the problem that the Tories have is that when the next person comes in, they're dealt with the same cards. And the lack of, I mean, Brexit in many ways is an achievable thing to do. There is a ladder to join the European Union that starts with a Turkey-like deal, then goes up, Turkey, Ukraine, goes to European Free Trade Agreement, EFTA, and then EEA, and then the European Union. And if you wish to leave, you can walk down that ladder, and it'll take you 10 years. The UK's problem is that structurally, it wants to retain the benefits of the Union whilst not being in it. And internally, its institutions are broken because we have a constitution that simply hasn't been fit for purpose for at least 50 years and is now unamendable. And we see that with Mrs. May's problem. She had one policy, the House of Commons rejected that policy. So in normal British constitutional terms, the government should have fallen. But under the current circumstances, Parliament then, her government didn't collapse. So the UK is stuck in this limbo, which it can't get out of. It can't have an election, it can't move forward, and it can't resolve its sovereignty issues. And I don't really see how anyone could have played it better or worse.
It's also tragic that her legacy, she never got to do anything else. I mean, here was a moderate Tory prime minister. We haven't had one of those since Edward Heath. So she was going to reverse austerity for the British people, which wasn't working, which was a complete disaster and brought on Brexit in a way, in and of itself. So she wanted to basically work on developing a middle class and doing things like expanding the health service and all these things, and she missed her entire legacy because of the poison chalice.
You can't overemphasize the extent to which the wheels of government have seized up. I mean, Parliament has done nothing other than hold these Brexit votes. It's absolutely put everything on ice and in aspic.
But here's a point, Simon, that Gordon just raised, and that is, what happens after she goes?
Well, look, I mean, I think one of the more interesting aspects of this state visit to the UK were the two meetings that did not take place. The idea that Boris Johnson, the front runner in the race to succeed Theresa May as Conservative Party leader and therefore Prime Minister, said, you know what, I don't think I want to meet Donald Trump, is very interesting. I mean, the idea that he wanted not to have a meeting that would only further underscore the fact that he was the front runner, but further underscore the fact that he was tied to Donald Trump is interesting. The other interesting aspect, the fact that Donald Trump wouldn't meet with Jeremy Corbyn. That may come back really to be harmful to President Trump. If we wake up in 12 months' time and Jeremy Corbyn is about to walk through the door of number 10 Downing Street as Britain's Prime Minister, the Trump administration has done nothing to establish any kind of tie or link to him, and that could prove to be very problematic.
And the Labour Party lost big time in the European elections just recently, so they probably need a new leader as well. I mean, Corbyn is fought by his own deputies. There are hundreds of MPs in his own party that don't want him there. If he didn't have all the activists in his party,
a breakaway group in his party as well.
He wouldn't be there. And the UK, our friends, they need two new leaders, not just one. But hey, we need one more than anyone else. So we're in this together.
And let me jump in there and add, we have the possibility of a no-deal Brexit.
Go ahead, Merrill.
We have the possibility of a no-deal Brexit, and I'm seeing more articles sort of saying, I think we actually could get by with a no-deal Brexit.
Gordon, go ahead. You want to say something very quickly?
The United Kingdom won't survive a no-deal Brexit.
That's right.
It will break in half very, very quickly. I mean, a no-deal Brexit is absolutely for the birds.
It's all about the Irish border,
from a practical example, if you go to normal... But it's not just the Irish border. If you go to checks at Calais, it takes about... the current checks will generate a traffic jam of 18 to 20 miles, and that hits the M25. And the M25 is the orbital motorway of London, so you effectively traffic in London stops with a check rate of 2 trucks and 1,000. I mean, it's a nonsense. None of this stuff is available. The Northern Ireland stuff is all fancy as well. And food delivery, we eat food that comes from Europe, and we have no mechanism to process it after a no deal.
The M25, of course, being the motorway about which Chris Rea wrote the song "The Road to Hell."
Fortunately, the second referendum looks more likely than a no-deal Brexit.
You think there will be a second referendum?
That's what the keenest experts are really saying, that even that may be a general election, but probably a second referendum, because no middle of the Tory party will allow this to happen. They will all go over to the other parties, and multiple parties will save the no deal. Then will come, well, Do we go to a general election when the two main parties are likely to lose it? Nope, they'll probably go for a second referendum, and hopefully that's when we rely on the Brits to come through.
Okay, and that's where we are going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's all for this edition of The Heat, but you can listen to more in our podcast. We'll be covering stories from around the world in a bit more personal and candid manner with our guests and correspondents. And the conversation also, of course, continues online. Chat with us about this or any other show on Twitter. We're at CGTN America, or visit us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.